Anyway, I'm delighted to be here. I think it's a fascinating show, and it has the most extraordinary, almost instantaneous impact when you come in through the door, around the corner. Because on the right there, you've got a series of 6 images, very strong, very powerful, very coloristic. And I was trying to imagine what I would think if I didn't know anything about Roland and his work, and indeed how he'd made them and what they consisted of. And I think the first impression that you get from them is to do with colour, and to do almost with that very old-fashioned but still potent word, beauty. They do have that impact. The colours actually come out at you in a very almost painterly way, even though of course we're not dealing with an exhibition of paintings, are we? These are very different from that. They're laser chrome on aluminium, but they have, as it were, in the background, in their heritage, something like that, painting. So I guess I would like to start the interview with Roland by asking him about that, whether he objects to my using such a word, or whether he goes along with it and acknowledges that it's almost part of these works. What do you think, Roland?
They are unusual photographs in the sense that they don't have a background, a horizon, or anything. It's just this flat area, and then there is something in the center. So that's certainly a very unusual principle or construction for a photograph. Whether that alone makes it painterly is of course a different question.
Yeah.
But as you said, the use of the colors, or more precisely in the row of 6 when coming from the entrance, the juxtaposition of one color with the black, which is almost, you know, an entirely black background where you can see a few bubbles in the oil, or a little bit of light coming through at the top. I guess, again, that's kind of unusual and makes it painterly in a sense.
And I was very struck after a while by the carry bags. You kind of think, oh, it's a carry bag, it's waste matter, and of course carry bags get a very bad press, increasingly so. They've been in the news recently. The British government has brought in some edict about plastic carry bags, very, very recently indeed. But, and it's quite a big but, when you start looking at these images, there's something about the crushed nature of them, the damaged nature of them, that makes you feel that they're vulnerable, feel that they're almost, I mean, they're not suffering, of course, they're not creatures. But there's something going on there, is there in your mind, or is it just me?
Well, obviously it's me who, you know, arranges them like that in the first place.
Yeah.
So some of them are more flat, like the ones in the polygon,
yes,
but others are more three-dimensional, if you want. So the idea of the flower, I want to be in certain images, and we mentioned the water before. The water can symbolize the transitoriness, but the water can also symbolize the journey to death. If you think of, you know, crossing the river Styx, or the nymphs in the ponds, you know. So that's what the water does, and the flower, on the other hand, can be seen as part of a life cycle. It dies in winter but gets reborn the next spring. So that juxtaposition I find very interesting. The idea of Ophelia as a person, not necessarily in the play, but what people made of her later, like say in the early 19th century when there was a real Ophelia craze, not over here, but also in Paris. That sort of created almost a prototype of a new kind of woman, la femme fragile, the fragile woman. And that fragility is, of course, also in the plastic carrier bags.
When did you yourself first come across the play and the Ophelia character?
I probably read at some point when I was still at school. When you mention the word Ophelia, people see John Everett Millais' Ophelia,
certainly do,
which has graced the walls of Tate Britain for well over 100 years now.
Yeah.
That sort of is the jump board almost to do something completely different with Ophelia.
Yes.
Because you have that dimension in the project somehow as well. It just lingers on in people's minds. But you can do something completely different and work very metaphorically. And one could argue that even with those particular materials, the plastic carrier bags and the oil, is a form of transience with regard to the works of art. If you look at the way people dealt with Ophelia in Romanticism, French symbolism, Expressionism, that's transience in the world of art.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you whether there was a moment in your life when you, I don't know, you were walking along and you saw a plastic carrier bag chucked away, maybe floating in water, and you had a kind of, and you realized that there could be a kind of starting point for a body of work, or was it not like that at all?
The idea for the Ophelia project came when I had an artist residency in Provence a few years ago in a beautiful country estate, and they had this swimming pool overgrown with algae, green, and I was sitting there looking at the swimming pool, and I thought that all these plants, if you leave them alone, would turn into oil some hundreds of thousands years down the road. And I had this idea of getting this cheap pink air mattress and let it float on the top of the water in the swimming pool. The idea being that the pink air mattress as an oil derivative, so something that used to be oil or comes from the oil, and green water with all the algae, something that's going to turn into oil in the future, blends and does something different when they come together. So that's really how the project started. And then in the second part, I decided to work with real oil, so get the idea of oil a bit more closer together, more physical, but at the same time more related to people's everyday life. A typical consumer experience would be to hop in the car in the morning, go to the supermarket, come back with the shopping bags. And so the oil which is in the car, in the engine, and the plastic carrier bags, they are just something most people live with on a daily basis. So I thought they are very important materials to use in that particular project.
So I'd like to thank you very much indeed, Roland, for withstanding these questions so very well indeed. Thank you.